Welcome to Scoreography, a podcast about the greatest sport on ice, figure skating. I'm Wendy Buskey.
And I'm Adron Buskey, and this is our season in review for figure skating season 2023-24. So this is going to be kind of a hodgepodge episode, kind of covering a lot of different stuff. Looking back at the season, recognizing some of our favorite things that happened this season, some of our favorite performances and breakouts, and everything that made this season exciting and really memorable. And we're also going to look back on a few things like the World's Gala, which we didn't talk about in our World Championships recap, and then just kind of hit on some predictions and considerations that we have for next season, some things that we will be thinking about coming down the pipeline, and a couple of little bits of news that have trickled out over the last week.
I'm excited to talk about this because it sort of feels like, I don't know, it's been a long season for not being any longer than usual. In fact, maybe a little bit even shorter because we didn't have the World Team Trophy like we do biannually in Japan to cap off the season. But it just feels like it's been going on for quite a while.
I think for us, because doing this show, we've watched even more figure skating than we really have before, just checking in on a lot of the smaller competitions and nationals all around the world that we maybe wouldn't have seen as much of in the past. So we really did just shove a lot of figure skating into our eyeballs.
We did. And I really feel like this season I learned a lot. Honestly, it was refreshing to view some of those smaller competitions and kind of see the evolution of programs and people as they went through the season. But also from you all that are listening, we've received so much feedback and education as to how to improve our viewing and analysis. So I feel like I have grown as a figure skating fan this season.
I mean, there's always so much to learn. There's a lot to absorb, and the sport is changing. And they all do. They all evolve. So we're seeing this sport go through its own version of evolution this year and over the last couple of years. And I think that's something we'll touch on a little bit too. But I think that the first thing we should hit is just a few kind of corrections and errata from the previous episode. The first couple of things, I think, just to kind of address a few things that we talked about in our Worlds recap. We made a mistake when we talked about Estonian skater Alexander Selevko in thinking that he would have locked 2 men's spots at next Worlds with his performance there. We were thinking about how that placement of his would have mattered if there were like 2 men in the competition.
Yeah.
And we had forgotten that if there's only 1 entry in it, they have to land top 10 in order to get 2 spots. So unfortunately, Alexander, even though he had the best placement for an Estonian man in Worlds history, I believe, he was not able to unlock 2 spots for Estonia in next year's Worlds. I have a lot of disagreements with the way that system works for how world spots
I'm sure
are
a lot
determined.
of people do.
Yeah, and I think we'll probably end up talking about that in the off season. But regardless, Alexander, or Sasha, as he likes to be called, had a terrific season and really did well there and is an up-and-coming star in skating. So,
and I can't wait to see him on the Grand Prix next season. I am excited for that.
Yes, because that's the thing, is that with that performance, he locked himself 2 spots on the Grand Prix circuit. So we should see a lot more of him next season, and that is definitely cause for celebration. There was also... I misspoke a little bit when I was talking about the performance from the South Korean men's skaters, in the sense that only Junwon Cha was a top 10 finish and the other 2 guys performed much further down in the rankings. And I think when I was talking about it, I was speaking more about them losing a spot for next year's Worlds because they just didn't have a really competitive team at this particular Worlds. But I think I made it sound like the other 2 guys had an abysmal performance at Worlds, and that was not the case. They just didn't rank as high. Particularly one of their skaters was freshly out of juniors, and so he did actually very well for his level of experience. It just wasn't enough as 3 men on that team to secure 3 spots for next year. So that's really what I meant there. Meant no disrespect to those other skaters. Yeah, it was just a recognition that only Junwon had really placed up there in that top 10 position, and that it hadn't worked out as well for them as far as securing a spot. But as several people pointed out, that was expected. Nobody really thought they were going to win 3 at this one.
No, it would have taken sort of a miraculous step from either one of those skaters to move way up in the rankings, which was highly, highly unlikely, or another medal like June had last season.
And then the last thing is just inevitably when you're going through a big recap episode and when you're trying to keep it to a reasonable time frame, and we did an hour and a half covering all that, there were a lot of skaters at that event, and we didn't talk about several. And there were a few people that in our comments had kind of said, oh, we're kind of upset that you missed somebody. And everybody has their faves, right? Like everybody has the people that they're watching and that really hit their buttons, and maybe we just didn't cover them. In ice dance, it was the Moravsky siblings, who were terrific and I think landed just outside the top 10 in ice dance and were really good. And we just didn't cover them because there were so many teams to talk about.
It was similar to Tashler and Tashlerova. We love that team, but we just didn't speak of them because they didn't break the top 10 here and they had a bit of a rough rhythm dance. But again, no disrespect to them because we're fans.
There were other up and coming skaters in the various disciplines that were people that really struck our fancy while we were watching it, but maybe we just didn't talk about them because, again, so many to cover. For me, I was really impressed with the women's solo skater Olga Mikatina. I'd seen her before, but I wasn't super familiar with her, and I really liked her skates at this event. I was really impressed with her. Just not somebody who made our final recap because it wasn't as high up as some of the others.
Right. It was Josephine Talliagard. Everybody loved. She just didn't make the same numbers impression, if you will, but was still great. She's just a fun skater to watch. So it was more of a time crunch and trying to keep the list shorter, but absolutely excited to watch all of them. It was just an hour and a half was a lot of editing.
Oh my gosh, you have no idea. But yeah, so there were tons of star-making performances that happened at lower levels, and hopefully we'll see that carry over into next season. We'll see some of those people who won fans there really start to catch more eyes, and that we'll see them come up on the circuit as well. One other thing that got brought up a couple of times in our comments was just a general question about the state of figure skating and the programs from this year and where it's going.
Just so much thought around it right now.
My general thinking about that, when I was talking about just a little bit earlier, that the sport is in a kind of a state of evolution, that there is some things that are changing in it. There's a lot of questions about what's coming up in ice dance and whether or not the programs that have been chosen and changed or whatever. And we won't really get into that in this episode. We do want to talk about that soon, but I think we're going to come back to that in an off-season episode because I think everything around ice dance needs a little bit more digging into when it comes to what's going to be happening over the next couple of seasons. But in general, anytime a sport, really kind of any area of interest, area of fandom goes through any kind of real evolution, I've used that word a lot, but I think it's the most appropriate word for how something changes over time like this. Inevitably, you hit a point where a section of the fandom is really excited for its direction and another section gets really frustrated with it. You will hear a lot of like, oh, it's not as good as it used to be, or it was great at this point and not now.
Or these skaters were much better than the current skaters, or, it's just a lot of preferences.
Right. Yeah. I understand that reaction to a degree, but if we're talking about the current state of figure skating, I'm really excited about it. Pretty clearly, if you've listened to the show over the course of the last year, or if even joining us just in the last episode, as it seems like a lot of people did. And thank you for that, because that last
Thank you a lot.
Yes. Thank you guys so much for talking with us and coming in, checking out that Worlds episode. That is by far the most successful episode that we've had on the show so far. And so we're really excited to welcome in new people. It's tough to have people join us right at the end of the season and then hope that, you can carry over into the next. But we've really loved having these conversations with you, and we appreciate all of that support. But again, if you've listened to the show, you know that we are enthusiastic fans of the sport, and we're enthusiastic fans of the skaters, of the people who bring this level of entertainment and excitement to us. And this Worlds was thrilling for us.
It completely was. And I feel like Worlds last year, while it had some incredible performances, and again, if you've joined us a lot, you know that Shoma is everything in my heart. And it wasn't as good for him this season, but that didn't make Worlds any less exciting or thrilling to me. It was just an evolution, I'm using your word. It was just different. And I can love both equally. It can be different. And frankly, as we get closer and closer to the next Olympics, that competition is getting more exciting. You're starting to see the separation between different eras. I'm using Shoma's language from interviews he's been giving. He feels like we're moving into a different era in men's figure skating, and that's to be expected. It's always going to change and shift. So while I absolutely was a gigantic enthusiast of the previous era that was Nathan Chen, Yuzuru Hanyu, Shoma Uno, and all of them, I'm excited to see this new group take the lead and carry this forward with Ilya and Yuma and Adam kind of taking that charge.
I also think that you can recognize that there are a lot of problems. Certainly there are systemic issues in this sport.
Oh my gosh, yes.
The abuse allegations that are leveled at the Canadian team that point to problems There's stuff that Gracie Gold's book has really highlighted about the damage that can be done to skaters in it when they are not supported well, and some of the body issues and mental health issues that run rampant in it.
Right. And there's also the litigation happening right now with a coach who is being accused of abuse against people who are minors and against the United States Figure Skating Association. So it's really troubling, to say the least.
Yeah. So we can reflect on the fact that there are issues that need to be fixed. And we think many of them can be, or at least be improved. But a lot of that is high-level systemic stuff that needs to be fixed. It is good to note that the sport needs to have improvements, that real, honest effort needs to go into fixing a lot of those problems, while you can still recognize that it is exciting and it is fun, it is joyful and artistic and athletic and all of those things at the same time. Both of those things can be true at the same time. What we have focused on as a show has always been on uplifting the sport and celebrating the sport, recognizing where there are problems, but we are not the show that's all about dissecting that stuff. But when I think about the discourse about like, oh, is the sport no good anymore? Or is the sport greater than it's ever been? Or, whatever those things that might be out there, there's something that I think about a lot as a person who has been a fan of the sport for now about 20 years, but is not as deeply long-term involved with it, like say you, who is a lifelong fan. I've been a part of like numerous fandoms over the years, things like comic books and movie fandoms and music, and to a certain degree even like other sports. And there's this familiar cycle that almost all of them go through, which is that people find this thing that they become a fan of, and in this case figure skating, and they find that they love it, that there's something about it that they really enjoy, and they make that love kind of part of their identity. And then they stay devoted to it for like a long enough time to watch it change. And then after a while, they start to longingly look back at the sort of golden years, the time when they first discovered it, when they first really fell in love with it. And sometimes the current modern era will pale in comparison to that early time period to them. And that memory of the golden years tends to recall everything great about what they loved at that time, and sometimes selectively forgets the things that were kind of mediocre or maybe weren't as great in that era. And that just informs everything about their idea of what is good and right and pure about this thing that they're a fan of. And then as time moves on and things change too much, they can feel disappointed or betrayed or hurt and sometimes even angry that the sport has changed, that this thing that they love has changed and isn't exactly what they used to love. And sometimes people lash out about that and they get really frustrated that everything sucks, even as a new generation of fans are discovering it in that modern time period and celebrating it. And they start to hate this thing that they've always loved, and they actively campaign against what makes a lot of other people happy. And so they have this thing, this fandom that they love, that they feel is theirs, and yet it isn't really. And it's moved on with the moment and becomes something slightly different, or maybe a lot different, for a new audience that is just discovering their version of their golden years. That change is a hard thing for a lot of people to deal with. I've seen it in comics and animation and role-playing games and movie fandoms, all those other things like I mentioned earlier. And they're complicated feelings about things that we've invested a lot of ourselves into. It becomes part of your identity. And sometimes it's healthy to recognize when that thing you devoted so much time to no longer brings you joy, and it might be just time to step away from it for a little while for new perspective. Because sometimes rediscovering it later on can create a second golden age for you. And sometimes you can also kind of be poisoning the well and making it harder for other people to enjoy something. I know that's a long diatribe, but it's something I think about a lot. And as I think about the sport going forward and the fandom going forward, I think it's really good to evaluate something in its own moment and when new people are discovering it and finding their love for it, and maybe not letting that golden age where you thought it was the best or most perfect ruin your enjoyment for the current age.
I mean, I think I was a little bit of that person back in like the aughts, because I was so obsessed with Kurt Browning, Paul Wiley, that era of skaters in the 90s when I was a kid. And to me, it was everything. And granted, I can still look back on that era and be like, my God, some of the best skaters of all time were part of it. Yeah. It was a golden age. It was remarkable. And some of the changes that I see these days, maybe some things aren't as good as they used to be in terms of technique or whatever. I can look at both sides, but also I agree with you. I'm really excited about the evolution of the sport and where it's going, because it really has in the past 5 to 10 years, I will say, you know, kind of with the Nathan Chens and Yuzuru Hanyu era, brought me back in and really lit me up in a way where I hadn't been in a long time towards figure skating. And it really reintroduced my next golden era of skating with them. And it's been fun because now all of that enthusiasm and excitement that I used to have that I'd sort of lost for a long time has come back around in a really, really big way, maybe just as big. And I appreciate new things and different things in it. So I think skating can be something that you love forever, or it can be something that you love for a short time, just like everything. I hope that there's lots of lifelong fans in here, but also if there's just one skater you really, really dig and then you're out, I understand that too. That's okay.
Yeah, that's an entirely valid way to enjoy something.
It is. I'm with you. I get you.
Yeah. So stepping away from that, let's dig into a few things because we want to run through a lot of stuff fairly quickly here. First off, I want to just touch on the World Championships Gala because we didn't
get to talk about it last time.
We hadn't seen it yet when we recorded our recap last episode. So we got, on one level, a bunch of exhibition performances we had seen previous in the season. So there's a few we kind of skipped through because we had,
We've seen them a lot.
We'd seen them a lot. And there's a few of them that are honestly just kind of weird that are not necessarily,
There's a teeny bit of cringe here and there.
Yeah. But there were some really wonderful standouts in that gala. Shoma won the gala as far as I'm concerned.
Me too. Shocking, I know.
Yeah. But his gala performance was spectacular. It highlighted everything that we love about his skating and was even more just passionate and powerful than what we saw him do in competition.
Yeah. His competitive programs this season were exquisite, but this one you felt like he was connected to in a different way, and he just sold the hell out of it to the audience. It was so perfect. I don't have words, so I'm just going to stop because I'll just gush for an hour.
Yeah, it was terrific. I was also really taken in with Hana Yoshida's gala performance there. She had a whole new costume. It's a program I don't think I'd seen from her before. And it really just showcased what a meteoric rise that skater's had this year, coming out of kind of nowhere into this season, very early on establishing herself as a real competitor, and then getting all the way to this level and doing something that beautiful at the end of the World's program. I thought it was super cool.
Yeah. And I definitely want to mention Ilia Malinin's here because he did, I'm going to apologize, I don't know the music specifically, but it was definitely a more aggressive, intense type of program. He did seem to have a solo during it where he was lip syncing the whole thing, which was kind of entertaining.
Really skating, really was just kind of miming a microphone, and you got a sense that this kid kind of wants a stage.
Yes.
Like musically as well. Yeah.
But that said, I really kind of liked it. While the music wasn't my fave, at the same time, it was obviously his. And you could tell that he was just completely in it. And I felt like it was, I hate saying this, but it might have been the most artistic expression I'd seen from him, even if it isn't a traditional artistry, if you will, more in the sense that I felt like he was emotionally connected to it. And that hasn't always been the case with Ilia. So while it might not have been my favorite in terms of it wasn't necessarily beautiful or anything, I appreciated watching it because I felt like this was him showing a part of himself. And I haven't really seen that yet with Ilia, so that was kind of fun.
I thought it was really authentic to him. I like that. There's several men in skating right now that are bringing this new kind of intensity, particularly to the gala performances. I think specifically of Kalmura and Shota Yamamoto. It's a different kind of vibe, but also bring that kind of intensity. Shoma definitely did at this gala as well. But yeah, I think that more than anything with Ilia, it's that this is a guy who loves a crowd. He loves to perform, and he brings very different gala programs all of the time.
Yeah, there's always a variety.
He and Adam both, they've done so many different gala exhibitions over the course of the season where a lot of people just cruise on the same one competition to competition. Those guys are constantly changing up what they do. And this from Ilia, I felt like the statement of him being like, okay, I'm world champion and I'm going to show you who I really want to be. And I do think that's pretty interesting.
It was.
I think those were the ones that stood out the most. There were several other good ones, and there were a few others that just felt like they faltered a little bit at that level.
Yeah,
but it was tired.
Yeah, I was going to say it was just, you could tell there was exhaustion. If you looked at any of the social media posts, you saw that there was a good time happening in Montreal anyway. So I'm sure a lot of partying maybe not as much rehearsing.
Yes, absolutely. Although plenty of people practiced their worm to join Lucas Bridski for his big group number. Apparently that was something that a whole lot of the skaters wanted to get in on.
I was particularly amused by Isabel Levita.
Yes, Isabeau's worm was pretty fantastic. And there's photos and video of her practicing that with Lucas beforehand, which is really cute. So yeah, everything about that was fun. Switching gears, immediately after a season is over, you typically see a lot of announcements of retirements and teams breaking up and coaching changes and all kinds of stuff seems to happen pretty much immediately. A lot of the skaters left the Worlds and immediately traveled to new places to get choreography and to work with other coaches and things. A lot of people stayed in Canada to do that. We've seen a few bits and pieces of news that it is about some of those changes, but the one that seems to stand out the most was the announcement from Chelsea Liu about her split from her Paris partner, Balazs Nagy.
Yeah, I was admittedly not terribly surprised
Not really.
on this one, but disappointed because they had such promise, especially early in the season when they first showed up. They matched so well. Their triple twist was just the best of the season, period. I think it was just gorgeous. But also, Chelsea never seemed to be able to get her jump landings under control. And yeah, we had heard a bit of news that during a U.S. training camp that Chelsea Liu wasn't able to land a single throw. And then as soon as we heard that was around 4 continents. And their performance at U.S. Nationals, all of that together just kind of led to something doesn't seem to be working. And unfortunately, we were correct.
Yeah, I really enjoyed this team together, and nobody floats in the air like Chelsea Liu. Like you said, that triple twist is magnificent. But in her post on Instagram about it, she talked about how she was stepping aside to focus on her own mental and physical health, that this season had taken a toll on her, and that she just felt it was better to step away. And I don't want to read too much into any of it beyond that.
No.
Other than just to kind of look at, this is the same training group that we've just seen Audrey Shin doing pairs training for. And we talked about that a couple of episodes ago. And it was a really exciting thing. And it seemed like her coaches were really excited too, because everybody was sharing it and talking about it. It's not lost on me that you have a very promising single skater entering the pairs fold right before the end of the season, and to see another team here split. So while I have zero knowledge about whether or not anything has happened as far as maybe Balazs training with Audrey or, doing tryouts or something, I got to imagine a lot of people were interested in doing tryouts with her. She looked really strong. I wouldn't be terribly surprised if we saw that as a new pairing, but also the offseason could do a lot of shuffling around of people, so we don't know.
I'm really curious to see who teams up with Balazs because he looked so strong this season. And I would assume that there's going to be quite a few tryouts. So curious to see how that news evolves over the summer.
I don't remember seeing Balazs make a mistake.
Very rare.
Yeah. So I got to think male pairs partners are rare enough as it is. A good one that's now a free agent has got to be a pretty attractive commodity in this sport. So I expect there's probably a line to try things out if there hasn't already been something that hasn't been announced yet.
Sure.
That's happened there. So
it'll be interesting.
Yeah.
But I expect we're going to see quite a bit of that shuffling through the off season.
Yeah. Here's where the actual recap of the season happens. We're going to just kind of talk quickly about a lot of our highlights from this season, because there was a lot of really big things that happened in this sport over the course of a long season of competition. Obviously, especially at Worlds, you had several big kind of historic things happen, but also we see a little bit of a changing of the guard in ice dance and a real come up from a bunch of new competitors in it. So I think we should just kind of start with Ilia because of the dominance of his performance at Worlds and sort of the reaction to that from the fandom and other skaters.
That's been, I think, one of the most interesting things this season was watching Ilia. Last season, he obviously looked strong. He had his first quad axel last season, so eyes were definitely all on him, but he was much more inconsistent. He came into this season, and other than at U.S. Nationals, for the most part, while it wasn't flawless, it was close. It was very strong overall. His U.S. Nationals definitely were his weakest event, but he still won. I mean, not that that was that surprising at U.S. Nationals, but considering the competition. At the same time, him coming into Worlds this season as the favorite, so much pressure, and obviously not in his best condition. And you would never know that. It was definitely one of those moments that now seems to be squeaking beyond the skating fandom. And it's gone, I hate to use the word viral because it just kind of makes me go, bleh. That it has gone viral on YouTube and Tumblr, I read the other day.
Tumblr?
I know.
Oh my God.
Right. But just in general, I've seen him appear in more mainstream publications. And we were at dinner with friends last night and said the name Ilia Malinin, and they knew who we were talking about, and they are not skating fans. So I'm like, okay, something has changed here. So this is interesting.
The continual conversation will be the artistry versus jump skating, I say in quotation marks, because I feel like that's the pejorative that gets thrown around a lot about the quad heavy, artistically less inclined type of skating that we see from Ilia. But I think, again, if you look at his Gala performances, I think that stuff is there.
It's just different.
It's just integrating it in a way that feels fully formed is still the ongoing challenge. But when we look at how Shoma and Yuma and the rest of the competitors talk about him, you're not hearing them complain that, but he has no artistry. You hear them saying, oh, I heard he's working on his artistry. Oh, no.
But you just said a name in there that I also want to talk about in terms of this season, and that is Yuma's comeback. I can't say enough about how wonderful it has been to see Yuma Kageyama come so measured into every competition. Like, he was methodical, and you could see it was almost driving him crazy because he didn't want to be, but taking his time, rebuilding his programs, rebuilding how many jumps he could do in a program, like getting all of it back so that he peaked at the right time. And I cannot wait to see what he does in the next 2 years towards the Olympics, because while it is, sort of figuring out how to beat Ilia feels like what they're all doing right now, I think Yuma's the one that can really do it. And it's going to be so fun to see, because I would not be surprised to see Yuma Kageyama do a quint. I'm just throwing it out there.
Yeah.
He has room.
He does.
He has room.
Yes. And also, I mean, while everybody's talking about like, oh, the sport could get really boring if Ilia just constantly wins, that also requires him to stay healthy.
Yep.
I mean, he does wildly risky stuff. Injury is almost an inevitability.
Mm-hmm.
And at a certain point, he may have to change the way he skates in order to address some of those things. Or he could just be like this for the next 4 years and nobody can beat him. We don't know.
We have no idea. But man, if he relents at all, Yuma is right there. But
Yeah.
honestly, I don't think Yuma wants him to relent. I think he wants to beat him fair and square.
Yeah, Yuma
at
wants
peak.
to skate up.
He wants to skate up. I mean, it's one of the things I love most about Yuma is that he's not looking at this like, oh, I can't do this. He's like, okay, I got this far. How do I get farther?
Yeah.
All right.
That's what you
I
wanna
love
see.
Yuma. I'm so
Yeah.
excited.
It's also been a fantastic but also turbulent season for Adam Siao Him Fa from France. Adam came on so strong early in the season and was unbeatable until the Grand Prix final. Then he had some shaky skates there, and then at French Nationals, and then at Europeans, which he still won Europeans, but not as dominantly as we would have kind of expected. And then he goes to Worlds and has a disastrous short program. And then, of course, nowadays the stuff of legend, where he goes from 19th to 3rd after an extraordinary free skate that shows that he is the total fighter that we would know and think him to be. The fact that he beat Yuma in that free skate, even with Yuma's powerful performance there. Adam is capable of beating Ilia. He did it on the Grand Prix. He is, for my money, the most interesting combination of artistic and jumping power skater in the men's division right now. I'm just going to be really interesting to see how he keeps using his storytelling and his abilities on ice, and whether he keeps exciting and frustrating the fandom with his backflips or whatnot. He's really got to think about how he uses that going forward.
But if we're talking about highlights of this season, I really feel like Kaori Sakamoto's three-peat for Worlds is super significant and worth talking about, because not only is it significant because it's the first time any woman has won 3 consecutive world championships since Peggy Fleming, but also this sport needs Kaori Sakamoto in the women's division. She has just been not only the class of the field, but the ambassador of the field. And I'm so happy that figure skating has a Kaori Sakamoto, because there's always this feeling of you need the person who is the leader. And with women, we've talked about it. I think every skating podcast or even commentator has talked about, it seems like when you look at these rankings over the past 20 years, it's always flipping between, since we had a Michelle Kwan, there hasn't been really consistency. It's just who's the new star of the year. With Kaori, we've had now 3 seasons of her being our star, and I can't wait for another season. I love Kaori.
Well, and what I think is most interesting about Kaori is that in all of her interviews now, what she's talking about is not the significance of the three-peat. She refers to it as a milestone that she's hit, but she's more interested in improving and growing for next season. There are clearly a few different technical issues that she needs to address in her skating, and that's something that she wants to do. And she's looking at quad toes and maybe even a triple axel from things that I'm hearing talked about. So the possibility that Kaori will up her technical content and ideally try to fix some of those edge issues and stuff is really exciting for obviously one of the best women in the sport and clearly our three-peat champion. So it'll be really interesting to see what comes next.
But since you mentioned triple axel, one of the highlights of the season for me too is Amber Glenn finally landing her triple axel in competition. And while we saw certainly an up and down season from Amber Glenn, and we talked about this a lot in the World's recap, but she knows that there are changes she has to make. I hope she's able to make them so that going into next season, she can really show up in the way that we all know she's capable of. She knows she's capable of, because she really is one of the best women out there. She just has to put it all together so that she can have consistent skates. But man, just taking a moment to appreciate that after so long of trying to get that triple axel, finally getting it, I am so ecstatic for her.
Also, just the fact that she is an adult woman who has added this really high level technical ability into her arsenal is huge. And she's doing it consistently and beautifully. Also, shout out to Rinka Watanabe, who got her triple axel back this season as well. So, and again, an adult woman upping the ante in the technical.
Women in their 20s, to be specific.
Yes, we love to see it. That stuff is great. Also love to see the debut this season of Japan's Hana Yoshida.
She is just a breath of fresh air. There is a joy that she brings to the ice that is just so palpable. Whether she wins or loses, I still feel like that enthusiasm is there. I think there's so much promise for this young skater.
Absolutely one of my favorites for the year, and I'll talk about that a little bit later on, but absolutely fantastic.
Well, let's talk about dance now, because there was something that got brought up a lot after the World Championships, and we mentioned it a little bit, that the dance competition of all of the world disciplines this season didn't have us as edge of our seat as we would have liked, maybe. Not the competition throughout the season, but just at Worlds kind of left us a little bit, I don't want to say ho-hum, but compared to the other disciplines, maybe not as excited.
I think the thing with ice dance is that by the time you get to the end of the season, you've seen those programs a lot and they don't tend to change a ton.
No.
There are a few different people who, like a Chalk and Bates, who are constantly changing and upping the ante in their programs. But overall, you've seen them a lot. They don't change a ton. And then there is that sense of people waiting their turn, or there's a sense of like you can kind of already guess how most of it's going to go, because ice dance tends to run by this hierarchy and like whose turn it is to get to the top of the podium. And so you don't have that chance for surprise or upsets generally, though we saw it a few times this season.
Right. But because of some of the comments we got and some stuff we read about Chalk and Bates and Gilles and Poirier and Guinard and Fabry, I just took a kind of step back and I'm like, okay, I know I wasn't as excited about this. I know that whenever we discussed it in the recap, I felt pretty good about the positions. But the more I've thought about it, I think I'm actually just a little bummed, because while I knew that the people that were on that podium were going to be who they were, I don't think they should have been. If we're looking at it without the lens of waiting your turn, I would have had Lajoie and Laga on that podium.
Yeah.
I would have probably had Carrera and Ponomarenko on that podium. And controversially, I know, because who knows, Lila and Lewis, maybe them too.
It could have been completely different. My favorite performances from that were definitely Lajoie and Laga from Canada. They could have been on the top of the podium. Ice dance is so weird about all of that stuff, but I would have been very happy with a completely different podium, even as people have called me out as one of the biggest Chalk and Bates fans out there.
I would never argue that I think Gilles and Poirier won that free dance. For sure. They won it. But if you're looking at both programs together, I feel like Lajoie and Laga were the strongest.
Yes.
Maybe that is my bias, but I'm also looking at it from just the frustrated ice dance fan who's maybe waiting for some real change. But I'm sure there are many others out there that think that others should have also been on that podium. I think that ice dance does this to everyone, where it does feel like it stagnates a little bit. And I think we need a little shakeup next season.
I agree. If there's a storybook highlight from this season, it is Deanna Stellato-Dudek and Maxime Deschamps from Canada.
Of course it is. They are the story of the season, other than, I guess, the men's division. But anything outside of that, it's Deanna and Max for sure.
Not only that she's the oldest woman in competition and somebody who came back after being gone for 16 years, but also enter into the pairs discipline a couple of years ago when it is definitely showing a sign of overall weakness. Although Paris has really come up in competition level so much over the course of the season. I was really, really lukewarm and worried about it at the beginning. And at the end, there's a lot of teams that I really liked a lot. But their rise and to make it all the way to Worlds and cap the season as winners on home soil, it is everything that you want it to be as far as the movie making kind of performance.
I really feel like that we're destined to see a movie about Deanna Stellato-Dudek, because it really feels like her story is that. It feels like a movie. It's ridiculous how impressive what she has done is and how completely unprecedented it is. So it's really quite amazing.
I think the real question there is just what they'll be able to accomplish over the next couple of years, because
Agreed.
I'm certain there's no stopping them. So they've got to be looking towards the Olympics and continuing on carrying this momentum. So be curious what they do. But I was just so happy for the comeback of Rika Mura and Ryuichi Kihara from Japan this season. After being gone most of it because of injury, having them reappear at 4 continents and then make it to Worlds and take silver at both of those was really nice.
It was so impressive. And I mean, this team, I know we gush a lot, but there's something really special about them. So I am looking forward to a healthy Riku and Ryu next season that can have a full competitive year, and we get to see a lot more of them.
So let's talk about some predictions and considerations for next season. I want to start with Chalk and Bates because they won Worlds here in back-to-back world titles. They are the most decorated ice dancers in the field. As I have said over and over again, I am a massive fan of them. I do think, though, that these programs and they as a team this season peaked at Grand Prix final. And certainly U.S. Nationals was a struggle because they were ill. And if you look at the rhythm dance there, it was spectacular. And the rhythm dance was spectacular at Worlds as well, but their free skate at both of those competitions suffered a bit after being just phenomenal on the Grand Prix and particularly at the final. My thinking here is at the very least, it is time for Chalk and Bates to take a year off. They're getting married this summer, and looking at just the course of this past season, if they are still looking at the Olympics as a goal and possibility for them, I think that they might be benefited by taking a year off and evaluating where they want to be in their career and in their competition and in their other pursuits, if not outright retiring. And that may sound crazy from somebody who loves their skating as much as I do, and I do. But there was just kind of a feeling for me at the end of this where I was like, this could be the peak. And as strong as those other teams that are coming up, and if the judging was fairer and less about, again, the hierarchy of ice dance, I think that those other teams will be putting a ton of pressure on them. And not that I don't think they're up to that challenge, but I do just kind of think it might be time to move on.
Yeah, I'm with you. I love Chalk and Bates, maybe not as much as you do, but I do love them quite a lot. But I agree. I kind of wonder if it's just time. I mean, they've been at this for a really long time. They are 2-time world champions. If I'm being honest, I would be kind of surprised if they took a third. I think next year we're going to see something different. Even at Boston, we're going to have a U.S. World Championship. So you'd think that puts them at an advantage. But I don't know. I'm not feeling it. So could be totally wrong there. They might just, show back up next season and have 2 incredible programs. And it's like, okay, back to the norm. But after Worlds, I had that same vibe. And they're not committing to anything. It sounds like they're waiting until after their wedding because that's their focus right now during the off season and then making the decision. So who knows? We'll see. But I'm with you. I'm kind of ready to see something new from them and maybe just see them kind of move away from competition, at least temporarily, but maybe just to be done.
I also kind of wonder a little bit about that with Guinard and Fabry from Italy. Now, considering that Milano Cortina will be
the Italy Olympics,
there's going to be a lot of I would expect both pressure and interest from them to continue on towards them.
Oh, yeah. Tons of pressure.
And they were brilliant this season, and I love this team. But at the same time, there was a feeling like they peaked at 4 continents and just a sense of it could also be a good time for them to maybe take a break or maybe look at the end of their career. But I have no idea. I don't have any reason to think that other than just my own observation. And I'll be more than happy to see them continue because I do love that
See,
team.
on this one, I disagree because I do feel like Italy ain't gonna let that happen. Like, they're their best shot at a gold right now in any discipline in skating, although I can tell that they are pushing towards team. They want that team medal.
Yeah.
I would be very surprised to see Guinard and Febvre retire. I would be less surprised to see Gillis and Poirier retire because they also are just in the we're playing it by ear, we're seeing where it goes. But I think they've got one world title in them before they actually move on.
Yeah, that'd be my expectation as well.
So
yeah.
We'll see.
And then, of course, the one we've been conjecturing about all season is Shoma Uno.
Oh, God. And that's the one I am putting my bets at about 90%. He's done. Just having read some of his interviews since the World Championships this past week, it all very much feels like someone who is about done with competing against Ilia and really just kind of done with competing altogether. Who knows, that may change over the off season, but it more sounds like he's prepping to make an actual formal announcement that he is retiring, which is heartbreaking, but frankly unsurprising.
I mean, I feel like Shoma's been hinting at it all season, even though he did turn up the heat and went as hard as he could through a lot of it. At the end of Worlds, it just sort of looked like relief on him. I think he was just happy to have finished it, for it to not have been a disaster. Even though he fell off the podium and landed in 4th, he still put out great programs. He still went hard. But there was just a sense when it was done where he was like, well, I did it. And now I can go play some video games and rest for a little while.
Yes.
So, except for, he's doing Stars on Ice in Japan right now. But, but still.
Well, if we're losing Shoma, we're going to gain back Kevin Amos because he's been sharing a whole bunch of practice footage and it's looking good. He looks happier. He looks more comfortable. Who knows what's going to come with him to competition? I'm sure that's going to be its own hurdle when he gets there. But I've just been so happy to see him back on the ice, looking like he's really happy to be there.
Kevin had one of the best programs of the season with his Bolero free skate.
Easily.
It was incredible early on. His Skate America performance should be legendary. It just unfortunately will be overshadowed by a complete meltdown through the rest of the season. Terrific skater, and he looks happier now. And the jumps that he's showing in practice look terrific. So here's hoping that'll be great.
I'm really going to be curious, and I am trying to keep it from prediction and leave it in the consideration camp of where U.S. women go next season, because we have the return of Alyssa Liu happening and we don't know what to expect there. But we'll see higher expectations now on Ava Marie Ziegler. We have now the world silver medalist in Isabeau Levito after a really up and down season. And then who knows what's going to happen with Amber Glenn. So I really think that the U.S. women's division is going to be far more interesting next season because there's other women besides them, but those 4 are really going to be fighting for now what is going to be 3 spots at a Boston Worlds.
Yeah, I feel like for a couple of seasons, it just sort of felt like Isabeau and company, you know? And with Amber Glenn having come up and won nationals, a very shaky nationals for a lot of people, but also Josephine Lee and Lindsay Thorngren, who have come up this season as well. Again, not consistent yet, but really Ava Marie Ziegler is the one that I'm most interested to see what happens next with her, because her podium win at NHK on the Grand Prix was a big deal and just really positioned her well then to go on to 4 continents and have a pretty good performance there. So yeah, it's going to be really interesting to see what she's able to do next season, and to see Isabeau, who really performed super well at Worlds and really outdid our expectations considering the troubles that she'd had earlier in the season. She did look a little weak again in the gala.
She was having a good weekend.
She was, she's probably not rested after that one. It was having a good time.
That's nothing.
Yeah. But we still are worried a little bit about that jump technique. But clearly she is a hell of a competitor who can rise to the moment and did so at Worlds.
And just a gorgeous skater.
Yeah.
Overall. So hopefully we're going to see a great competition within the competition over and over again all season, next season between those women.
Yeah.
But I mean, I think the biggest consideration for next year is really the fact that Worlds is going to be in Boston. And the U.S. hasn't had a World Championships since believe it was 2016. So
Yeah, it was
9 years.
years ago.
So I'm just really curious to see, with the kind of lacking fandom that we've seen in the US, and I don't mean that in the sense that like there's lots of fans that are very, very enthusiastic here, but there isn't that broader excitement in the media and the pop culture landscape about figure skating right now. I'm wondering if this may help. I'm wondering how the United States Figure Skating Association is going to boost interest in that. I'm really hoping that this can kind of be a shot in the arm to figure skating in the US. If it's done right, it could be. So we'll see. I'm trying to be optimistic towards it.
The big worry that we had was going into Worlds and whether or not the Canadian audience would show up, and they did.
They showed up big.
And they were wonderful. So we've had a couple of competitions this season where you really had great turnouts that showed with the sport how exciting it can be, how well received it can be. So now it's our small part to support it here in the States and try to promote it and be like, oh my God, we need to make this a big deal because we're going to have it on home soil. So we need to really show up for it.
And thankfully, I mean, the Skating Club of Boston is one of the biggest in the country. They're really supportive of the sport. So we'll see. I'm thinking that it's in the right place to be a big deal. It's just waiting to see how the media reacts to it and how much buzz we can get going. So we'll be part of that continuation of trying to make the sport bigger in the States. And hopefully you will be too.
Yeah. Really quickly, I have just some bullet points I want to hit. I don't want to dwell on them real long, but just there's some season highlights that I'm going to say here. The first one is just Yuna Aoki at Challenge Cup in Tilburg, Netherlands. Tiny little competition that was happening right before Worlds. Yuna Aoki was not super notable on the international stage this year, but those performances from her there were divine and just some of my favorites. I wish there were better recordings of them because it was at such a small competition.
No, and I think that that is part of what got her to say, yes, I am going to stay in senior skating competitions next season. So we get more Yuna Aoki next season.
Yes. Also, just want to highlight the emergence of Mikhail Shadorov, or Misha, as apparently he is also known. Mikhail really stepped up on the men's international circuit this season and won a ton of fans. He's an exciting young skater. Also, a team that I thought really came up this year was France's Dumaget and Lemercier. They were an exciting team to watch, really interesting and dynamic. I had not paid much attention to them before, was really into them. Four Continents had two standout performances that I want to throw a highlight to. Bo Yang-jin, who had a terrible World, unfortunately, but was just fabulous at Four Continents.
He really was.
And just seeing the stuffy rain for him every time he was on the ice was amazing.
Yes.
But Mona Chiba at Four Continents was fabulous. Just incredible skates for her and just a little bit of an uneven season for Mona, but she's an incredible skater and she was great. I mentioned Josephine Lee earlier. Her silver win at U.S. Nationals was really outstanding. Not a great season for her otherwise, but this is two U.S. Nationals in a row where she has really stood out.
I think that this was a growth season for her, and coming into Nationals and doing as well as she did will serve her well going into next season. When she was at World Juniors, she didn't even expect to be there this season, and she didn't have a terrible performance. It was just not maybe as great as she would have liked. So I really think that she shows so much promise. And now it's having bigger international footprints than just showing up incredibly large at nationals.
Yeah. In pairs, the rise of Germany's Hassan Valadin and then Italy's Ghiardi and Ambrosini and Beccari and Guerrisi. All of those teams I really enjoy watching. I was very excited to see them all appear on the scene and really make a mark in Paris this season. So I was excited for that. And then I mentioned it a little bit earlier when I was talking about Eva Marie Ziegler, but just the NHK women's podium that was Ziegler and Lindsay Thorngren and Belgium's Nina Pizzarone. It was just a really nice podium of up-and-coming skaters, all kind of making a name for themselves there. Nina, of course, has been in the conversation this entire season because she's been so consistent. Unfortunate at Worlds because of injury, but she is really strong and one to watch going forward. But that was just such a neat podium overall.
It really was. I liked all your bullets.
Thank you.
They're good. All right, now it's time. Gold in our hearts. For the season.
For the season. So this one isn't confined to people that didn't actually win a gold. This is for the ones that we're going to carry forward as the gold in our heart. So I think you should start because I just went through my crazy bullet points, but I want to hear yours.
All right. So we're going to do one for each discipline.
Yeah.
Okay. So gold in my heart. I'm going to start with dance. I don't think it'll shock anyone who's listened to this podcast that my gold in my heart for the season is La Joie and Le Gars. Or Lala, as they're often referred to in social media. Marjorie LaJoie and Zachary Lega from Canada. You're just going to keep doing it here and there. I love them. I could leave it at that, but I also just want to point out they have made a monstrous step forward in the overall rankings. Scott Moyer is one of their coaches and has said publicly that he thinks that they're going to be on the Olympic podium in Italy in 2 years. That's a bold statement, not shocking, bold from Scott Moyer.
Yeah.
But I agree with him, and I hope he is correct because they deserve it. They're incredible. I think they proved that point when in the short program at Cup of China, they beat Piper and Paul in that short program. So that was their first kind of like toe in the water of, yeah, we're going ahead here. We'll see how it goes, but they are definitely gold in my hearts. I can't say enough good about them, so I'm going to keep moving on so I don't just gush. The men, gold in my heart this season is actually Yuma Kageyama because that guy just impressed the living heck out of me. I've loved him forever. But the evolution of his skating with Carolina Kostner as part of his team has been remarkable. And as I said earlier, the way he approached his comeback, the measured response, each competition adding a little bit more, I was just so impressed. And I see his earnest love of the sport and being competitive while never being not a good sport. I just adore this skater, and I cannot wait to see what he brings next season. In the pairs, I think it's obvious. Deanna and Max. Gold in my heart isn't enough of a statement, maybe platinum. Unbelievable inspiration. I mean, as a woman who has been watching this sport forever, seeing a woman who is 40 years old doing what she does, it genuinely makes me want to cry when I think about it. It's just so unusual in the best possible way. I hope we see more of it. It's just absolutely remarkable. Finishing it off, the women, Ava Marie Ziegler is gold in my heart this season because she came out of nowhere and just made herself one of the top women in the US and really questionably one of the top women in the world, just made herself a force to be reckoned with. And I love that kind of story when we weren't looking at Ava Marie Ziegler at the beginning of this season as someone to watch for podiums. And by the end of it, it was like, yeah, duh, obviously, she's definitely up there. There's just something really cool about that. She has her own very specific style. There's just something special about her, and I can't wait to see more from her.
Oh, I like all of that. The golds in my heart, I'll echo Deanna and Max. They are my pair's choice for all of the reasons that you said. They are inspiring and wonderful, and I love that. And I particularly really love the interview with the vampire program.
Oh, it's so good.
It's so good. Men, gold in my heart is Adam Siao Him Fa. It was from the Worlds event as well. His were my favorite programs of the season. I love his skating style. I love the storytelling that he does in his programs. He definitely peaked a little early, but then that comeback is a thing of legend. So I hand that gold to him. In women's, the gold in my heart goes to Hana Yoshida, particularly for her performance at Cup of China, where she won that on the Grand Prix circuit. Her lightness, she kind of reminds me of Mai Mihara in the joy that she brings to the skate, but it's different in its own way. I love seeing her skating all through the season, and I just think she's really one to watch. She's a really exciting skater. And then gold in my heart for dance shouldn't be an enormous surprise for anybody who listened to our Europeans episode, but it is Lithuania's Alison Reed and Saulės Ambrolivikis for that performance at Europeans. It's also my favorite free dance of the year. I connected with it from the first time that I saw it. The storytelling, the message that they're bringing there, the way they act in it, everything that they did at Kiwanis was just flawless. It was an incredible performance. I've already watched it a dozen times or more since then because I think it's spectacular. And that'll be one of my bunker programs going forward because I just love that performance so much. So yes, gold in my heart to Alison and Saulės, and probably my favorite moment of the entire season.
Ooh. My favorite moment of the season was Deanna and Max at Worlds, for sure.
Yeah.
Just cried my eyes out. All right. I think that's good. I feel like we're now officially done with the season.
Yeah, we have finished the 2023-24 season. We have a lot of things that we're going to do in the off season, both as the audio only podcast, but we're going to try to move into video a little bit on YouTube and do some more sort of shorter form topical episodes. They're going to be a little different from what we do on here. So the way that the show rolls out in the off season is going to be an experiment. So what I would love to know from you guys who have made it here all the way to the end of this episode is in the comments, tell us the things that you'd like us to hit in the off season, in this summer. What topics would you like to see maybe a deep dive into? What's something you maybe want to see in a video format? What things did we not hit over the course of this season that you want to see elaborated on more heavily or explored? let us know in the comments, or you can go to our website and send us emails there and let us know. So we always love hearing from you guys. We love your ideas, and you definitely give us things to springboard off of. Like the Q&A episode gave us so much to talk about and think about.
Yeah, absolutely. And again, big thank you for this whole season, for sticking with us. And, for anyone who has found us, we're so happy you're here. And for people that have stuck with us all season, I constantly tell Adron that I am shook sometimes that people care about anything we have to say. So the fact that you do, and that you care as much about skating as we do, I am so excited that we're connected and that we get to enjoy more next year together.
Yeah, so hopefully you'll be along for the ride with us during the long dark of the off season. It's always a hard time. We all have the big come down after Worlds, and then
by July we're itchy.
Yeah, we're gonna be aching for a fix by the end of it to get our figure skating on. So hopefully we can help fill that void over the course of the summer with some good figure skating content. So as usual, all things Scoreography can be found at the website at scoreography.show. Primary hub for the show is on YouTube. That's where most of the conversation is happening, along with the episodes there. So if that's where you're at, throw us a like and a subscribe. For Scoreography, I'm Adron Buskey.
And I'm Wendy Buskey.
We'll talk to you next time.
Bye.